Now it's up to you. It's up to you to make interventions. I'm sure that you have so many questions. But before that, I'll take just a few minutes with our guests.
What is your insight on knowing what we know now? What kind of shifting of thinking should we apply in the way of solving the problems of the development of children?
Well, I'll say three things. One is that we have to recognize that the traditional medical model is going to be insufficient. The second is we've got to start to train child health professionals differently. And the third piece that I would say is a paradigm shift is that we have to start to talk about evidence-based community health and recognize that there's a lot to do. So when I think about those changes, I think we need the medical home and other things. I think we need to train child health professionals differently. Maybe some would argue, and this is their territory, not mine, that we need to train lawyers differently and social workers differently. And then the third thing is that we need to extend the science that exists in evidence-based medicine to community perspectives and know that there's a lot that we could do differently that really does have evidence to support it on a community level.
Thank you. Dr. Steinmetz?
The
solution is not medical at all. The solution is social. Health is not a medical issue. Health is also a social issue. A disease is a medical issue, but not health. So it seems very difficult for us to make this distinction. We're calling our Department of Health, but as a matter of fact, all of the money is invested in diseases. We should call it the Department of Disease. As soon as the population understands where health comes from and why we are ill, they will push their elected representatives to take a different action.
Any other remarks? Dr. Kohler?
Of course I agree that we need a different approach to teaching for the pediatricians and also for other people involved in care for children. And I used to talk about child public health as an issue that stands on three legs. One leg is the definition, very broad definition of health provided by the World Health Organization. The other is public health and its methodologies with the population involvement and the epidemiological, the management parts of it. And the third one is the special needs from children. And that altogether makes out the child public health, and the task of child public health is to focus on children's health put in a social and a political context. And that is very important.
And you can't just look at the child's body. You can't just look at the social situation. You have to look at both. You're not doing justice to your patients, to your clients, unless you do both. And there's some ways that we can do things that don't cost a lot of money and have a big effect. For example, most of us expect that infant born at risk is going to go into an incubator. That's the standard of care in most places still. But incubators were never scientifically studied, probably because no neonatologist wanted to assign a fragile baby to not be in the incubator. So nobody ever studied whether they work well. It turns out that it works much better if you're more traditional and you put the baby in contact with a human being. Skin-to-skin contact, kangaroo care. The babies get out of neonatal intensive care much sooner. They get out much healthier. In Sweden, where they did the first randomized control trial of skin-to-skin contact versus incubators, the effects were so dramatically better for skin-to-skin care that now in most of Sweden, it's the standard of care. And the doctors have to keep changing their prognoses because the babies are doing so much better than they ever did in the incubators that they have to keep changing what expectations they give the families. It's better in every way, but it's also so much cheaper. And another thing that costs very little money has been piloted in the US called Experience Corps. It's putting the elderly people with the children. For example, older people go into the schools, not to do anything high level and fancy, just to talk to the children, to greet them, to sit down and read with them or hear them read. It was originally piloted to improve the health of the older people, which it does. But they also found that it improves the health and the education of the little ones. So you help both ends of the age spectrum. And what everybody else said, everything has to be about health and prevention rather than disease and cure. We all know that. We all know that. It's just that somehow it's not as fancy. You go in and heroically rescue somebody, and the media can write about it. You prevent something, and it didn't happen. And there's nothing for the newspapers.
Criticizing the media again. Alors, c'est à votre tour.
Now it's your turn. It's your turn. So I take this opportunity to thank the people who are translating, because I have the feeling that it works, because as I look to the people, so I see a hand raised over there.
I'm going to
Please.
speak English, maybe that's easier. I'm concerned about ADHD being overly diagnosed and overly treated with medication. And I'd like to know your take on that and how we could do better at...
It should only be diagnosed when other possible causes of the behavior have been excluded. For example, it's estimated that maybe a quarter of the people diagnosed with ADHD don't have it, they have sleep apnea. Because if you're sleep deprived, you will look like you have ADHD. And just a one-night sleep test can determine that. Also, stress will make you look like you have ADHD, so you need to exclude that as another possible reason. There are ways to reduce stress, and there are ways to help a child with ADHD manage that without medication. Often you need a combination of that with medication, but one way is all the kinds of mindfulness techniques that people are showing. And one very good way that's felt relatively easy is just to take some deep breaths. It's shown that everybody at every age will do better on exam if they just take 2 or 3 deep breaths before the exam. Simple way to improve your performance. Often we ask children to do things that aren't developmentally appropriate, like expecting a 5-year-old perhaps to sit for 20 minutes contemplating his breath. It's not going to work. But there are methods that children can use that are, in fact, meditation. One way is walking meditation. You just try to stay on a line. For a little kid to try to stay on a straight line like on the sidewalk is as hard for us as to walk on a balance beam. And when they get better, you can make it harder, so you can have a game that all of us follow a leader, maybe the most dysregulated child in the room. Everybody has a bell. And the game is nobody should make a sound with their bell. That's a meditation activity that's age appropriate for any age. And you don't tell the child we're going to have you do meditation. You tell the child we're going to play a game. Also, the work of Craig Barrage and colleagues has shown that the level of methylphenidate, the level of Ritalin that works for the behavioral problems is higher, much higher than the dose that works for the cognitive problems. And usually, if you're a responsible doctor and do dose-response curves, the way you try to determine if a dose is right is you ask the parent, is the child doing better? You don't give some neuropsychological cognitive test. And the parent is mostly basing it on the child's behavior. The level that works for the behavior will actually impair prefrontal cortex functioning. So the child will get less out of school than if the child wasn't on the meds. The level that works for the cognitive prefrontal problems is the lowest possible dose of methylphenidate. So the dose that works for the cognitive is different than the dose that works for the behavioral. And that mostly hasn't gotten through to the practicing physicians. So most children are being over-medicated for school, even if their behavior is being properly controlled by the medication. It would be great if we could get more and more away from the medication and come up with real-world things that help the child regulate himself without having to do it pharmacologically. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Please.
Bonjour, moi c'est Maxime.
Good
Ma
morning.
question,
My
c'est
name
pour,
is
Dr.
Maxime. I
Jeffrey.
will have a question for
Savoir,
Dr.
au
Jeffrey.
niveau, des
I
enfants,
wanted to know, insofar as
la difficulté en
children are
apprentissage
concerned,
ou,
learning
c'est toutes les sortes de
problems,
difficultés au niveau de, pour
all
apprendre avec
the
les enfants, soit à marcher,
difficulties
peu importe
when a
les
child,
autres
that the
manières.
child
C'est-tu
has
plus
to
difficile,
learn to
où est-ce
walk,
que vous
walk
habitez
and
dans
so on?
votre,
Is it
quartier, ou s'il y a une
harder
place où est-ce que
when
c'est
you
plus,
live in your own neighborhood or
le taux
not? Is there
d'enfants qui est plus en
an
difficulté
area
est plus
somewhere
élevé à une place qu'un autre, ou-
where children have more problems
So,
than
Maxime, you
in
just asked a
another
million-dollar
area? That
question. No, and I really mean that. You know, I think what we're beginning to understand is that your development and your environment and your genes, your biological makeup, all interact together in very complex ways. And so there isn't a simple answer to your question. But, you know, kids develop, and we want to promote healthy development. And part of the way to promote healthy development is to create environments where kids can really thrive. And some things, you know, Dr. Diamond is talking about, you know, we don't give kids Ds for walking. But we need to make sure, at least most of us don't, but we need to make sure that what we're trying to do is to promote kids' positive development early on, and particularly in those ages that you're talking about, in young kids, because there's a tremendous amount of evidence that about 90%, 80 to 90% of brain development, of formation of connections in the brain happens in the first 3 to 5 years of life, happens prenatally too. And so these are really key time periods for kids to acquire lots of new skills. You know, Minister Hivan, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, but you know, it's so important that you're here because the contrast is, at least in the United States, is that although we know that that period from a prenatal time period to 3 or 4 or 5 is so key, we invest very little resources in kids that age. And so, Maxime, you know, you asked a really good question. I'm not sure I can give you a straightforward answer, except to say that you targeted in on the right thing of this development and of promotion and development. And one of the things that's sad, that's very sad, is that in the United States, at least, maybe in other places, we don't pay enough attention to this issue, and we don't put resources into kids and young families to really try and help them do all those important things. Did that help at all? Did I answer your question at all?
Ça répond à ta question?
Oui, thanks.
Okay.
Parfait.
Oui, bonjour, mon nom est
Yes,
Angelo,
good
je
morning.
médecin à
I'm
Cowansville.
a family doctor in
En fait, c'est une
Quansville.
question un peu pointue,
My
mais,
question is directed to
qui,
Dr.
qui, dans le fond,
Diamond,
réunit tout ce que
and
tu
maybe
dis,
it's a bit
parce que
specific,
les cours d'école, les
but
cours, les- pour
it is
bâtir
related
des-
to
des
all
packs
that
aussi
was
en
said,
termes de stress des enfants,
because
et
we
aussi
talk
on
about the
améliore probablement
playgrounds,
au niveau cérébral.
build
Vous sembliez
to
dire qu'il y
reduce
avait,
stress
au niveau neurobiologique, c'était
in
vraiment très
children. Maybe
important,
also we
l'impact,
improve brain
sur le
development.
cortex
You say
prefrontal.
that
Est-ce que
it
c'est
is
réversible,
very
d'une
important,
part?
the impact
Et,
on
est-ce
the
que, sinon, on
prefrontal
connaît la plasticité
cortex.
du
Is
cerveau.
that
Est-ce qu'il y a
reversible,
d'autres
that
méthodes compensatoires
impact?
qui peuvent nous amener
We
comme
know
vraiment sur le
that
terrain
the
à
brain
essayer d'un
has
peu
plasticity.
délier des fonctions
So
exécutives,
as
soit
interveners
facile
in the
de-
field,
d'avoir
can
d'autres
we
méthodes
do
à essayer.
things in order to maybe improve these executive functions in the
absolutely.
child? Are there
And it's-
methods we could use
Prefrontal
for that?
cortex remains plastic throughout life. So at any age, you can reverse and you can improve prefrontal cortex. It's wonderful. That's an incredibly hopeful message. Don't give up on anybody at any age because it can always be improved. I think the problem is not with the brain, but it's with the self-concept. because we develop an image of ourselves early, and that can be very hard to change. So I matured early physically, so I was very tall in elementary school. Now I know empirically I'm not very tall now, but I have this image of myself as a tall person. And I think, that's fairly objective, right? I can look at a group photo or stand by a measuring stick and get objective evidence that I'm not tall. If that is so resistant to change, how much more resistant to change is the self-concept that I'm not capable or I'm stupid?
Gradually sliding down.
Thank you. The things that are more subjective. And if you start school with not such good executive functions, think about what happens, right? You're blurting out the answer. You're jumping out of your seat. You're having trouble paying attention. You're not completing your assignments. You're grabbing things from other kids. You are always getting yelled at. You're getting lousy grades. You think, I can't do this. I'm no good at it. The teacher doesn't like me. I want out of here. And then imagine you start school like a good little girl. And you sit there and you pay attention and you finish your assignments and you never make trouble, because it's mostly the girls who at this age are so quiet and meek. And the teacher says, I wish I had a whole class of children like you. And you think, I like it here. I'm getting good grades. They like me. I want in. So you have one child who wants out and one child who wants in. And so you get a bigger difference every year. They diverge more and more every year they're in school. Because one child expects to succeed and the other child expects to fail. And too often the schools are very unfriendly to little boys. We expect them to sit still when normal little boys can't sit still. It's normal. It's not ADHD. It's normal. And years ago, we never expected that. What did you do in kindergarten? You played. Now you're supposed to be a college student and sit like you guys. And so the boys get so frustrated that they think, I can't succeed in school. We can change that. We can do something. At any age, you can do something.
Je m'appelle Lola.
My name is Lola,
Je suis étudiante en
and
psychologie.
I'm a
Et
student
voilà,
in
on est très
psychology,
privilégiés de travailler en
and it's a privilege for us to work with family in community-based, but also work in hospital environments with children. Is there hope when you work only with the child and not with the family of the child? Is there hope for those children because they go back to their environment at the end of the day? And is it very useful what we do with them at the hospital since they go back to their environment afterwards?
Is a possible source of hope. There are any number of ways that what you do can be pivotal in a child's life. I mean, many of you will think of some adult who was major in your life. Maybe it was a doctor, maybe it was a teacher, maybe it was a relative, but there's often some time when maybe things weren't going well at home or weren't going well at school, and somebody made a huge difference in your life. So there's no question that just working with the child in the hospital has the potential to be a pivotal moment. So anything has the possibility of being a pivotal moment.
It's really important to recognize that kids belong in families and in communities. And there's been a lot of social policy, at least in the United States, that has removed kids from families and removed kids from their communities, and it has disastrous effects. Instead of, I always want to go upstream and talk about prevention, and we should be supporting parents and families from the very onset so that those kinds of situations don't happen. But when they do happen, it's really important, and there are evidence-based strategies like multi-systemic therapy, family functional therapy, multidimensional treatment, foster care. You probably know some of these, that focus on families. Because the outcomes for kids, if you never give up hope. I agree with Dr. Diamond, but you have to look at this from a big picture standpoint. And the outcomes for kids, once they get removed from those preventive relationships, from those strong relationships, are really bad. There's evidence in the United States that just a whiff of the juvenile justice system has very deleterious effects for kids and for kids in the long term. So Did that help? Yeah.
Dr. Cullen.
Most cases of child abuse happens in the family. So you should keep your eyes open even when you are dealing with family, not automatically say that the family is always to 100% best for the child. There are exceptions that you should be aware of.
OK, vouliez-vous ajouter quelque chose sur ce
I
point-là,
wanted
Dr.
to
Julien?
comment to react to what was said just now. This is a very important point that is being raised, and it's important also to hear all the different points of view. In community-based social pediatrics, we decided to work in close association with the family. Very often, we were accused of being too pro-family and even to protect the families that could be abusing their children. We're not talking about sexual abuse, but neglect, for example, and minor physical abuse. But we realize that the fact that we supporting the family, because we don't work only with the child. It is good. Of course, if the child goes to childcare, it's good because he's being stimulated. But if there's no connection with the family, it will not be sustainable because the family will still have the bad habits and the adverse habits. So when you work in proximity, as a mentor, for example, as a support network, and this is very effective in terms of preventing abuse and also helping children. For example, we've seen children who are not well, and a few years later, they tell us what was really pivotal for them, and we realized that we had a pivotal role. For example, there's a young girl that was abused. We were never able to pinpoint the culprit, but we knew that it was happening, but we had no proof. Nobody could do anything. It took a few years, and we decided to support her and help her as far as we could. And one day I was in my clinic, and she would come to summer camp on the playground, and she told me, "I have to tell you something," and then she told me everything on that day. And afterwards, I went before the judge. I told the judge she had a lot of courage. And what she told me later, she said, "What helped me, you helped me, your whole team really helped me. But not when you told me to eat my vegetables. It's when you came to tell the judge that you believed in me and that I would succeed." But we don't know that. We don't know when it happened. So we have to be there all the time. It has to be really a continuum, and we don't know really what is going to work. So we have to give support and to be present.
Merci beaucoup.
Another thing about supporting the family is the huge risk in foster care. You want to form an attachment I talked about. Well, foster relationship can end at any moment, and you know that. You might go back to your family at any moment. So I'm supposed to fall in love with you, knowing that at any moment I might lose you. How incredibly hard is that? You know? I mean, it's asking for something that's very unnatural and hugely difficult, to become attached, to fall in love with somebody that at any moment was going to disappear from my life. How hard is that? And so it's there's so much more hope if we can get in there and help the family. We're already putting ourselves at one disadvantage when we have to go to foster care, because you have to work against that. And in BC, it's very common for foster parents to take a vacation from their foster child. And so there are facilities, group facilities, where the foster child goes when the family goes on vacation. So are you a member of the foster family or not? Are you a visitor or one of us? So there, you know, it's important when it's needed, but it needs to be used as a last resort when you really have given up every possible hope of working with the family.
Merci
Bonjour, Lynn Champoux, de Médecins francophones du Canada. I just want to remind everybody that 30 years ago, Dr. Julien was alone. Okay? And now we are 250 in this room. So The Power of One is a very cheesy South African movie, but it's very true. So if you are a professional and you write in the newspaper, you will have a voice.
One comment?
I did want to follow up on that and say that I think that we have to start to talk about power, and that's in some places a dirty word, but we have to start to talk about power and our ability to change things for kids. And so I'm glad that you brought that topic up. I'm fond of quoting others, and you know, Martin Luther King said, "Power without love is reckless and abusive." And I look at the front page of the paper every day and I think about 2/3 of the stories could fit under those headlines. But he also said that love without power is sentimental and anemic. Love without power is sentimental and anemic. And I believe we love our kids. But we need to be powerful leaders for them. And we need to engage them to become powerful leaders too. And that is a missing part of the paradigm shift. And I think, you know, Dr. Steinmetz said it very eloquently that telling stories is important. People remember stories. Relating stories is key. These are real kids, real people. It's heartbreaking. Data is really important. The science that Dr. Diamond brings, the leadership that Dr. Kohler brings, you know, has changed things. All of a sudden, we're paying attention to young kids because there's images of brains. Stories and science are important, and the third part of what's important is to develop our power and to really strengthen our ability to do these things. And you know, and the way that happens is in part through conferences like this and through inspired leadership and models for doing that. But it's a very important thing and something that I think we need to get more comfortable talking about.
Madame Yvon?
Moi, je veux vous remercier.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, I would like to thank you because it is extraordinary for a minister to run away from the National Assembly for one morning because, you know, I was authorized to come. I had to negotiate hard to be able to leave the question period at the National Assembly and to be really fed by very interesting reflections and thoughtful processes. So I think in line with what has just been said, you have a huge power indeed, and this is what Dr. Steinmetz was saying, that to influence public opinion so that such health questions, prevention, but also the question of well-being of our children become a national priority, because as an elected representative, we can believe in this, and I have faith in this, but to put something on the top of the list and for it to also really become concrete, well, you know, you need the support of the community, of the professional orders, of the working groups to make sure that this becomes a priority at the highest level. That really is an example of the power of working together. But since I have the great privilege of having 4 experts in front of me, and when you say it's important that public policies, of course, should be well designed, and I've just started a few months ago, well, if there was one thing, one program, one initiative, I'm thinking in Sweden, in Europe, or elsewhere, of your respective experiences, that is maybe not a huge thing, but that can make a huge difference, well, I'm very eager to hear it.
Hey, that's interesting. It's your chance. Dr. Kohler.
I don't know if I can give you one solution for every problem that you have here or wherever. I once talked to our Minister of Social Affairs, and And she told me that in the government she was working, they have decided to look at the child issues in a way that every decision that they took in the government should always be followed by some consequences. Everybody should ask themselves, now, what is the consequence for children? And that's not only the decisions on schools or anything like that, but also taxations, for instance, or environment, pollution, and everything like that. I mean, if you take a decision, important decision in the government, okay, but think also, what are the consequences for children in this? Will it be good consequences? Will there be consequences that you perhaps have not considered? Because if you're not pushed that way, you don't think that way. So I think that was one of the better solutions I've heard from any politicians. Okay.
I don't have a solution, but I think I have what's the greatest opportunity. Because every parent starts out wanting to be a good parent. Nobody starts out not wanting to do right by their child. Everybody wants to be a great parent and have a great future for their child. So the moment is when there's a new baby, when you're starting, because that's always the chance for it to be wonderful, and the parent is so motivated to do what's right. And if we can get in there early and support parents to be the parent they want to be, because everybody wants to be the good parent, if we can just get in there early and not wait till the problems start to develop in the family or the child starts to show the parents that the problems that bring them to the doctor, but get in there early, like they do in Sweden, where they have so much support early on for the new parents, to get in there early to help them be who they want to be. I think that's the greatest moment of opportunity.
You know, my ignorance is I don't know exactly what you control, but I always have an answer that I would tell you to do. And, you know, so given that I might not know exactly what you control, I'll tell you three things. One is child care subsidies for working parents. Child care subsidies for working parents lift parents out of poverty. Poverty is a huge issue, and it has the potential to put kids in high-quality early childhood environments. If I was going to pick one policy that I would strengthen in the United States, I would strengthen child care subsidies for working parents for those two reasons. It impacts parents, lifts families out of poverty, impacts kids, places them potentially in high-quality early learning environments. Along the lines of what Dr. Diamond said, and if it's more appropriate to address this to you, the Nurse Family Partnership or the P Positive Parenting Program are the two programs that focus on young families, start with mothers at the time that they're pregnant, and say that women and mothers are valuable, and they have the impact of a variety of positive child development outcomes, and they prevent child abuse in the majority of families. You know, and this is something that, you know, I just want to reiterate and say, the majority of child abuse is preventable. You know, and I think that would be either one of those solutions, depending on, you know, the P Parenting Program or Nurse Family Partnership would be appropriate for young families. So I gave you three, I'm sorry.
Dr. Steinmetz, je vous ai vu parler beaucoup avec la ministre.
Dr. Steinmetz, so you spoke with the minister during the break. Can you tell us what you discussed with the minister? Can you tell us what you discussed with the minister during the break? I saw you speaking to her. It would be up to her maybe to share that. Of course. My three colleagues are perfectly right. This is really the basis. I don't have much to add of this nature, apart from what you suggest to follow. Maybe to speak about these questions more often at the National Assembly, because we're listening to you. So it would be important. Good morning. My name is Julie Hébert. I am a medicine student at McGill University, and I would like to thank the organization to also allow students to be present. So we are still young in our training, so it's very inspiring to be here. Thank you very much. My question is maybe the role of professors in education. We speak a lot about physicians with social workers and social stakeholders. But what about educational initiatives? And the school or faculties, well, the school especially is really the second most important environment after the family environment. So when we look at toxic stress, what about the significant adults in the life of those children? So that includes the teachers and the professors. So how can we integrate them better in the community approach?
What makes better teacher and what makes better education? And it's very frustrating because we've had the research for decades. And we try to say it, we try to tell it, we try to get it out there, and somehow it doesn't seem to affect what happens. So we've known for decades, for example, that you learn better by hands-on learning, by active learning, than by sitting there. If I asked any of you who learns the route better, the driver or the passenger in the car, you all know, and you all know why. Because the driver is going to actively use the information and the passenger is passively sitting there. So we know this, and we have good scientific studies on this. And then we put kids in school, and we have them sit just like you guys, passively sitting there, while the teacher is up here using the information, learning it very well. We know that the children are going to learn better if it's hands-on. They're going to like it better. They're going to be more motivated. Everything's better if it's hands-on, and it doesn't happen. So I think what we need to do is get into the pre-service, get into the teacher training in the universities so that teachers are trained not only that this is important, but how to do it. Because many teachers would like to do it, but they don't know how. And we have many good approaches now to how to do this, to how to work with the parents and have them integrated with the school so that they see that there's something concrete that they can do to help their child's education. But unfortunately, teachers are so, the training tends to be so focused on subject matter of the subject of English or French or mathematics that there's so little else that seems to get through in teacher training. And I think that's where it really needs to happen. It's an excellent question.
So I would just add to that by saying two things. One is thank you for being here. It's so important that you're here. Because the next generation of leaders is going to be what changes things for kids, I'm convinced. We're not talking about paradigm shifts that are going to happen in the next 2 years, unfortunately. I think we're talking about things that are going to happen 10 and 20 and 30 years down the road, and you're going to do them. So, I would argue that you might be the most important audience members. The second thing is to echo what I often say is that there's an evidence base for education too, and we ignore it at our peril, and we do things that we think are common sense and that actually don't help kids. And one way I say this that seems to make sense to residents is that the drug dealers on the streets aren't dumber than the kids in school. The drug dealers on the streets aren't dumber than the kids in school. So what is the difference? And one of the really important things that makes a difference in education is an orientation towards social and emotional programming in young grades. So our evidence-based programs proven at the very highest levels, like promoting alternative thinking strategies, the PATHS program, or the Primary Project, or Coping Power program, that for kids who are struggling in school, in early elementary school, get them back on track. And they have outcomes, that are improved academic performance, increased high school graduation rates, the very outcomes that we talk about as being desired in education, but that we fail to consider, at least in my view, we often fail to consider the question of what works to really provide those outcomes. And we end up with the solution of the week, or the solution that a billionaire investor wants, who wants to dabble in philanthropy around education, and what we really should be asking are the questions that you're asking. What really works in education? How do I play a role to lead?
Je vais reculer un peu.
I'm going to go a bit backward.
Vous donner la responsabilité
And
à
I'm going
vous-même.
to give you the responsibility.
Je ne pense pas qu'on
I
doit
do not
vraiment
believe
s'attendre que quelqu'un
that
nous
we should
nourrit tout le
expect
temps
that
et
somebody
nous
should be
doit faire
feeding us all the time and telling us all the time what to do in any given situation.
À la fin des choses, on est
At the end
responsable.
of the day, we are responsible.
Et je pense que chacun
And I
a
believe
sa
that each one of us
responsabilité
has
tous les jours
his or her own responsibility on a daily basis to rethink life, to rethink about reality, because reality changes all the time.
C'est pas si on regarde la réalité
If
d'aujourd'hui
we
et il
look
y a
at
10 ans,
today's
elle est
reality and
différente.
we compare it to
Tout
the
le monde va
reality of
convenir.
10 years ago, everyone will say, well, it's
Sauf
different
que ça a
today.
changé
Everyone will
quotidiennement,
agree.
tous ces attentes.
We agree on that, yes, but it
Alors,
has changed
quand on
on a
travaille,
daily basis.
On
So
rencontre
when
des
we
situations,
work, then we
on
are
devra
facing some situations,
questionner.
of course. We'll be
Comment c'est
confronted. We'll
différent?
have to question
Est-ce que les choses
ourselves.
que j'ai
How is
appris
it different?
sont
What about
encore
those things that I learned
applicables
earlier?
maintenant?
Are they
C'est la
still
meilleure
relevant,
façon de régler
applicable,
le problème. Ou est-ce
implementable?
que je dois utiliser ce que j'ai
So,
appris
or
comme
do we,
tremplin
should I use what
pour
I've
faire
really
quelque chose de
learned
nouveau
as a
dans une nouvelle
springboard
réalité?
to go towards a new reality, to
C'est,
create some new approaches?
Je vais citer quelqu'un,
I'm going to
un
quote
vieux chinois,
an old Chinese
qui,
who said,
je vais le faire en anglais parce
I'm
que
going
la
to do it in
traduction
English
de mon chinois en français,
because
je
my
ne fonctionne
translation
pas.
from Chinese into French is a bit hard for me, so I'm going to say it in English.
The coming and the going. Vous arrivez, moi je quitte. Hein? Know nothing of each other's fate. C'est une autre façon de dire que
So it's another way of saying
la
that
jeunesse doit toujours se
youth
interpréter la
has
réalité à leur façon.
always to interpret
Pas
reality
nécessairement écouter les vieux.
is in its own
Qui ont
way,
eu une
in their own
relation,
way. They don't have
une
to necessarily
interprétation, une
listen
réalité
to
complètement
the older
différente.
ones because the older
comprennent
people
pas vraiment
went through a
ce qui
totally
vient parce qu'ils
different
sont en train de
experience. So it's hard sometimes for them to be inspired by the old people say because at the youth they experience something completely different.
Yeah,
Would you like to add
very
anything?
shortly, I'm very glad that school was mentioned here because that's one of the most important arenas that that children have, and we know a lot of examples where these these particular adults have been in school, where these significant others have been teachers or people in school, and that's very important. And the other thing is that the school is also an arena, the last arena, so to speak, where you can reach all children, where you can make studies, but you can make interventions that reach all, not only a particular selection of children coming from somewhere or not, but this is where you reach everybody, and that's very important to know. Then, of course, it's important, as has been said, that what kind of teaching is included, and what kind of message are you giving to the children? What is important in life? It's important with knowledge in mathematics to come high on the PISA evaluation, international PISA evaluations, or is it important to become an adult, a healthy, well-functioning adult? It's not always the same thing, and I think sometimes they tend to shift the focus in the teaching in that way. Anyway, school is a very important arena for children.
Alors, on m'a permis de continuer un petit peu plus longtemps,
Well,
donc j'avais
I
vu
was
deux
allowed to
questions là,
continue a
et
bit
Gaëlle ne levait pas.
very briefly. Yes, I'm Gisèle Moisin. I'm the director of a social pediatric center in Quebec City, and I wanted to say to the minister before she leaves, maybe I saw her political staffer who came back. She was asking for one initiative that should be taken by the government for the well-being of children, and I would say, well, to really promote the opening of all of community pediatric centers in all regions of Quebec. And when I say promote, I would say that as a director of the Quebec Center, and I'm sure that all other directors of all the other centers will agree with me, it is a battle. We do this really, we carry this day after day. It's a lot of work. And if we felt we were supported to open such centers, we would be very, very happy that the National Assembly should speak about us and that we exist, because Dr. Julien has been working for 20 years, and he has done this really working very hard, and so do we. And we want this to be recognized and acknowledged by everyone. So the desire, the wish I would have to the minister would be that the initiative that has started to be taken in several environments, but there is still room for more, and it would be very interesting to develop a lot more community social pediatrics. Well, I'm not from the medical world, but I want to say that since we have somebody representing politics here, we cannot forget this request. Thank you very much. Thank you for your comment. I wanted to thank the minister because she had the patience to come. Dr. Julien said that you are a school director. That's interesting. A school principal at the same time. So, well, thank you very much for your comment. I have another question here. Good morning, Patrick Rasmussen. I'm a school psychologist, and I work in Atikamek and Higher Mauricie. Well, thank you very much for all your interesting comments. And I also wanted to send a message to the minister. And I wanted to also ask Dr. Kohler in what he said earlier, that any decision that is being made should always bear the question, what impact does it have on children for any decision? Well, it's not the file of the minister, but there are two recent files which are quite coherent between a political decision and impact on youth health. There have been some 50 million cuts for social assistance and social help. So that means that we are putting the health of those underprivileged families even further. I know it is not the file of the minister, but there have been so many cuts that have taken place. And maybe she should go in front of the National Assembly and say that those decisions that have been made to proceed to such cuts go against the well-being of families and children. When we speak about community level, I do hear what is being said. We have also an integrated approach, physical needs, the needs of the heart, the needs of the spirit, and the needs of the soul. And as was said earlier, each children in the community is responsible for all the health of all the community. So in Montachi, we have a very beautiful approach, what we are calling the circle of helpers. And in these small communities, we work on an intersectoral basis. So we work directly with social services, with the police services, and with mental health services. So I really have a great time working in this ecosystemic approach. And for the Atikamek Aboriginal people, it is also a way to reclaim their land, and this is what their identity also is all about. And we've heard recently about First Nations and Aboriginal people. We have to work a lot from nation to develop international partnerships. So miigwech to all of you, which means thank you. Well, yes, this afternoon, as a matter of fact, we are going to deal with this question, that is the solutions, the experiences that we're going to share. So come back this afternoon, please, to share this with us. Dr. Julien, maybe a few words before lunch to present a short synthesis of the morning. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank my friends. I know that something will take place. I'm really always surprised, and I'm very proud. And I wanted to check with you whether what happened is what took place. We invite scientists, and they speak about humanistic and social things. I mean, they are scientists, right? You know, this is secretly what I was hoping for. And I'm really not disappointed. And there is some kind of a leading thought process here that really corresponds or matches exactly the values that we're trying to spread in community pediatrics. And you know, the recommendation of the American Academy of Pediatrics, when you say on the basis of the scientific data that we have, this is what we have to do. And yes, we really understand that this is what we're trying to do in the communities. And I wanted to remind some maybe highlights. You can speak about sciences during lunch break. You can also ask them scientific questions if you still need to. But, you know, science is here to actually support us. And, you know, when I look back, I realized that I've built this model just based on my intuition, or rather also because I was frustrated, and sometimes when you're frustrated, you become very creative. But I've also used my intuition to develop this project. And this is what science is saying. You have to trust that, and I'm very happy to hear that, because it proves that I was not mistaken. I needed also to grow, you know, sometimes. As an adult, as a grown-up, I still need to grow. Some other major highlights that I would like to underline. First, of course, you have the clan mother this morning who reminded us that roots matter. And it's really major because a lot of community and social pediatrics are based on social roots. And the idea that, you know, if you have a tree that is growing, and if you move this tree elsewhere, there may be 50% or 75% sometimes of chances that then the tree will not grow any further. And I think this is a very strong image we should keep in mind. And the other one, you know, that inspired by the Aboriginal world, with the great values from the Aboriginal world, and not just with Aboriginal, but also, you know, in Africa, you say that the child belongs to the community. If the community abandons this child, we need a safety net, and this is where our institution should play the role, but it is first of all the community that has to take the responsibility of raising a child. And this is what we try to apply also in social community pediatrics, and to provide everyone and all the stakeholders with the tools that are necessary. And we've seen that in Quebec, communities have lost a great deal of power for different reasons, and I'm not going to dwell on those, but also because the state was in charge and the state said we want to take charge of that. But then we have actually a mechanism which is not working very well because the communities are not present, they're not participating. But even in richer communities, not just in poor communities, but in Westmount, you know, there is a dissociation with children, and I've already seen some teenagers, you know, they lived in the basement, and they had no communication with their parents that lived upstairs, and they were kind of, you know, closed down or locked down in the basement, and some parents did not want to hear about them. And those are richer families from the Westmount district in Montreal. But I would like to come back on the idea that 30% in Quebec or in Canada that we lose, you know, we don't catch them, and we cannot help them because they have not been accompanied. This is why they do not succeed. So we have to think about that. We've spoken about attachment. It is essential. You know that in social pediatrics, our two major bases are identity, roots, respect of identity, which is part of the convention, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and attachment. And you know, in social pediatrics, one of the great value is the being attached to the children and to the family. We speak about our children, our families, but we never put the family aside. The family is always at the core of our intervention. So it's another major principle that has been underlined this morning, and that we, in our practice, try to apply as much as possible. We have spoken about cost-benefit, $1 invested out of 16. So those are really tools that you have at hand to reach out to your communities, to call upon the government and the authorities and say, well, give me $1, it's going to return $16. When we speak like this to a business entrepreneur or businessman, then we speak a language that they understand. So most of them are interested in making investments that will have such a return. They, try to improve, in a way, their image, their reputation. But we have to play that trump and do not hesitate to use it. Our expert says $1 invested will, have a return of $16. It's important. The last remark. We've spoken a little bit about this, but not much. But it is the continuous way of accompanying children throughout their development. That's another principle of community pediatrics. You have to be present as soon as possible, during pregnancy, if possible, at birth, to be able to follow the path of the child's development with the family. And when the family has difficulty, we can congratulate them, of course, but when they have difficulties, we do not judge the family. We accompany the family. We help. We'll support them. And this is also part of our major values. We have just one baby today, by the way, but it's a wonderful baby. So I invite you to, greet this baby. Now, that's closing the parentheses here. And it is a student in psychology who came to do a training course, and she lives in Ontario, and she's also very interested in social pediatrics. Okay, I'll close this parenthesis. Now, I'm very proud of what took place this morning, and I would like to thank our experts and friends who come and support our approach. And I would like also to recommend the same thing to the minister, who I think is with us in thoughts. We need to support social pediatrics. That's one of the key movements to change the paradigm in Quebec. It's not the only one, but interrelationship between institutions, between the Children's Aid societies, and schools, hospitals. It's important to have these interconnections, and the movement that we are trying to develop will have some impact, not just in 20 years, but between maybe 5 and 10 years, we will be able to change the situation in Quebec. So thank you very much, and we'll meet again in the afternoon.